We're ready.
Good evening, and welcome to the City of Glendale Civil Service meeting of January 27th, 2010. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gantis,
I'm here.
Commissioner Manukian,
Here.
Commissioner Devine,
Here.
Chair Coleman.
Here.
Let the record reflect that Commissioner Abkarian is absent.
Next item, please.
Minutes. Action. Consideration of the minutes of the meeting of December 9th, 2009.
Move for approval without reading.
Second.
Roll call.
Commissioner Gantis,
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian.
Abstain, I was not here.
Okay. Commissioner Devine
Yes.
and Chair Coleman.
Yes. Next item.
Oral communications.
Okay, I do have a number of cards here. I have a specific request from Herbert Milano. Mr. Milano, will you step forward, please? You request that you speak before Barry Allen during oral communications, and I would like to know why.
There is oftentimes during oral communications there is no opportunity to really have a debate or discussion.
Could you speak up, please?
Oftentimes,
Flatliner in the right ear. I just can't hear
I'll
you.
get a little closer to the microphone.
Thank you.
I have found that sometimes when there is a contentious issue that is being presented in front of a commission, that sometimes after I sit down, there's a comment made by one of the commission members. And of course, being oral communications, I have no chance or opportunity to do any kind of rebuttal. So sometimes it's good to have someone who understands the issue that I presented to be able to correct sometimes the misinterpretation or the misdirection that is oftentimes given. And that is the reason. So just in case that someone decides to basically question or misdirect my comments, I guess Mr. Allen could be here to basically, set the record straight.
If Mr. Allen has no objection to Mr. Milano's request, I'll grant it.
I have no objection. Very
Okie doke.
Just in case these individuals come before, we get to the typical issues that you address here. Issues about a complaint from a subordinate, issues about a denial of a new position, things of that sort. And yet, those discussions, if they become contentious, are done during closed session. My concern is that a client would attend and go to Mr. Gantis' office to obtain his support as an attorney and his representation,
because there will be a little bit more leverage there with regard to how the staff was presented. In other words, if I were a staff member, I would be very concerned to say anything negative that would be against Mr. Gantes' client. A few months ago, we also had a similar issue with another representation having to do with a parking contract. Now, there are many options having to do with how the parking situation is maintained. In the city of Pasadena, they're automatic now. There is no staff. But the city of Glendale proceeded, basically said, no, there are no complaints, everything's fine, and basically the contract is renewed. No other alternatives are being presented. If I were a staff member making a presentation again, where it is had to do discovery, and its discovery, to be said, that may not be favorable to Mr. Gantes' client, I would be hesitant as well. So here is my issue. I consider that a conflict of interest. Now, Mr. Gantes is on his third term. And according to the city's either ordinance or the charter, you basically have 2 terms. And you can go to a third term only if no other additional individual of qualified experience could be found. And this is a city of over 100,000 adults. I would imagine that you could find capable individuals with good reasoning capability, good decision-making capability that can take the position. My opinion, this conflict of interest has lasted long enough. And it is my suggestion that Mr. Gantes resign from this position or be removed by the City Council, because this is not a tolerable approach for a city that expects unbiased approach to its deliberations on all of the issues having to do with contracts and so forth. Either that or Mr. Gantes cannot represent his clients in front of boards and commissions. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, but under oral communications, discussions is limited to items not as part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Commissioner Gantes, do you have any questions for the speaker?
I have no questions. This issue has come up for a long time. This is my 16th year as a commissioner in the city of Glendale, not all on the Civil Service Commission. Each of these issues that Mr. Milano has brought up have been discussed. Scott, would I be exaggerating to say we've discussed this 7 or 8 times at least?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I really wouldn't hesitate. I hesitate to try to pin down a specific number, but it's been definitely more than a couple of times.
Yes. And I'm going to ask Mr. Howard and I, the answers are there, and I know Mr. Howard has them because I've heard them, so if I could ask Mr. Howard to respond to 2 things, the conflict of interest issue, and more importantly, the 3rd term on the Civil Service Commission.
Let's start with the last first. The terms outlined in the terms for members of boards and commissions are outlined in Title II of the Glendale Municipal Code. Those term limits relate to members of boards and commissions that are outlined under Title II. The Civil Service Commission stands alone as a charter-created commission. Now, therefore, the term limits do not apply to members of the Civil Service Commission. Now, with that said, it doesn't mean that the City Council can't decide on its own that they would like to, at the end of a term or otherwise, to have another person appointed to the Civil Service Commission. But the 2-term term limit does not apply to the Civil Service Commission, number 1. Number 2, on the issue of conflicts, the potential conflicts, there's 2 ways to look at potential conflicts. One is, do you have a conflict which essentially precludes you from sitting as a member of a board or commission? That is, it's either an incompatible office, or you're essentially pulled in such a manner to that your loyalties are so divided between either representing, in the example given by Mr. Milano, clients, or making fair decisions involving individuals that come before the commission. And that would be arguably something that on its face is just too broad a conflict to tolerate. That's not the circumstance here. In reviewing the law relative to conflicts, what we do is we look at and assess that on a case-by-case basis to determine whether or not a case coming before the commission on, let's say, for example, a disciplinary matter, may potentially create a conflict for a council member because of either undue bias, and again, I use that in the legal sense. I don't mean that in the practical sense, but undue legal bias or offend some other constitutional principle of procedural or substantive due process. And we'll look at that on a case-by-case basis. And if we find that to exist, then we will so advise the commissioner to recuse themselves from that matter.
Thank you. Next is Barry Allen.
I think they have it at a certain, I don't know. Check.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Barry Allen, Vanguardians. One of the unintended consequences of civil service is that it allows those with its protection to be able to whistleblow without fear of job loss or retaliation. Unfortunately, most employees don't take advantage of that opportunity, which some do through the use of the insider column in Vanguard. Of course, there's still retaliation, but if retaliation is egregious enough, you have a situation such as the one filed on January 20th, a lawsuit of the 5 Glendale police officers. Several years ago, a fireman threatened me in this very chamber, threatened me with bodily harm. I reported it to then Fire Chief Gray, who said he would talk to the fireman and place a report in his file. Later, I asked Gray if I could see the report, and the answer was in the negative. Not too long ago, that particular fireman was promoted. I doubt that a report was even written or that the fireman had been spoken to by the chief. And the chief, of course, is covered by civil service. This taught me that there's another consequence of civil service, and that is there is no mechanism for the public to report grievances about civil service employees. And I believe in Glendale that's everyone except the city manager and the city attorney. The system is flawed as it lacks a mechanism to lodge a complaint against a city employee and have it properly investigated. That creates a further and continuing distrust of government. For instance, we requested documents from the fire department under the Public Records Act through the city attorney's office, and we were told that no such documents existed. We discovered those documents, the ones that didn't exist, in the state fire marshal's office. Those documents from the fire department actually showed that the 2 firemen who were alleged to be injured weren't. According to the report, there were no personnel injured, and that was a report submitted from the Glendale Fire Department to the state fire marshal through CAL FIRE. We gave the senior assistant city attorney every opportunity to correct her error. This was more than a miscommunication. It was a lie to cover up something like a possible disability claim. We don't know. So who do we make a complaint to about this egregious conduct? Then there was a report to Neighborhood Services about the actions of a council member. The head of Neighborhood Services wrote a report that contained glaring errors indicating this council member was operating a business under a non-existent entity, and then he closed his business and used the location in a CR zone for storage, a violation of the zoning codes, which Neighborhood Services chose not to investigate. The city manager has given performance bonuses to certain unnamed employees, even though the Supreme Court has said that performance bonuses are compensation, and that is public information. He, through the city attorney's office, has refused to provide the information, leaving a perception that some bonuses were for political purpose or to buy out claims for sexual harassment. I've chosen to stand before this body and ask that you put on the agenda a discussion on a complaint process for the public. Unless this commission has another solution, the public is left with filing a Superior Court action for a declaratory judgment or a writ of mandate to address the grievances. And certainly we have documentation on all of the statements. I thank you. I'm Barry Allen.
Any questions for the speaker? Hearing none. Next, Richard R. Espiritu.
Good evening, Mr. Chairperson, members of the Commission, and staff. I am Richard Espiritu. I'm going to be talking about the complaint that was filed with the Department of in the court regarding the 5 officers with the Glendale Police Department. But there was an article in the Glendale News Press Tuesday. I'm going to read one paragraph, and this is a quote from Mr. Scott Howard. There are many allegations in the complaint which are absolutely, utterly false. I read the 42-page report, and I would tend to agree that maybe some of the officers that are named as defendants may be unjustly named in here. I'm also the one person who exposed gross racial discrimination regarding the Armenian community when they put into the website the Armenian parasites go up to Western and Glen Oaks. There's some comments there that are in this report that I would like to know. There's 10 comments. Armenian women are descended from cows. This was made. This was a comment that was made at the Armenian Relief Society. I just passed through a herd of camels, and that's what it smells like. Regarding a surveillance camera, Armenians are uncivilized. They don't have front plates on their cars, and they register their cars to other members of the family. When a 4-year-old boy, Armenian, was missing.
Dr. Espiritu, I'm going to interrupt you. What are you reading from?
My notes from this particular...
These are quotes from the lawsuit?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll go get the lawsuit. All right. Could you do us a favor, please? If you're going to quote, you need to tell us the lawsuits are on line 28 line paper. We generally cite when you do something from a lawsuit, you cite the page and the lines that you're reading from, so that we can have an accurate record, please, sir. So if you'll start at the beginning, go to the page,
okay,
and say page 2 of this lawsuit filed
page
January.
9.
Sir, let me finish.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. May I continue?
I'm more than happy that you spoke up, because I was just about to.
Okay. This lawsuit filed January, whatever, I'm making up a date, January 20th, I don't know when it was filed, 2010, page 3, lines 16 to 18, then you read. That's the way it is appropriately done, so that we have a complete record, if you could, sir, please.
Surely. Thank you, Mr. Gantis.
I'm sorry.
Regarding the first one, it's on page 9, line 10.
Read it again, please.
Armenian women are descendants from cows.
Okay.
And this is something that one of the officers said...
Allegedly.
Allegedly.
That he heard.
No, it's time to step up here. I understand that individuals have their First Amendment freedoms to distort and state whatever they want here. But it's time to step up and correct the record. The allegation in the complaint is that, and I'm not sure which, and there were 2 circumstances. One allegation related to a member of the Board of Equalization making a comment like that. The other was a member of the Sheriff's Department making a comment like that, not a member of the Glendale Police Department making that comment. And I know it's very convenient to only state a portion of what's in there. But 1, these are allegations, and 2, even the allegations don't allege that a Glendale police officer made those comments.
Is that correct, Dr. Espiritu? I don't have it. I haven't seen it. Obviously, our city attorney's read it.
Chairman Coleman, can I ask a quick question?
But Mr. Espiritu attempt to answer Commissioner Gantis.
Yes. I was just reading the entire thing. The paragraph says that the officer was asked to translate, and that's what was told to him by another officer. Okay?
We've interrupted him, so he should...
Oh, that's quite all right.
No, I mean...
I'll stop.
That's quite all right.
All right, go back and read the pages, and then why don't you continue? So
Page 9, paragraph 10, line 10.
Okay.
And the other one is on page 16, line 11. Okay?
Okay. And is your contention, sir, what you're reading, are allegations made in a complaint of statements made by Glendale police officers? Is that what your point is?
The officer present made a complaint to another...
That was a direct question.
Yes
or
what
no?
you're saying, are you attributing those
Yes, sir.
statements to Glendale police officers?
Yes, sir.
And those are contained in a complaint filed, correct?
Yes,
So
sir.
they're allegations. I mean, we don't know that they're true. They're allegations.
They're only allegations. Okay? I'm not saying that they actually existed. They're only
Okay.
allegations.
I just want the record to be really, really clear.
Okay. Okay. With that, I've used more than my time.
No, we don't want to hold you
that's-
up. Are you done?
That's quite all right.
Okay.
There's quite a few other things, but I think I was unprepared, and I used my time, and I thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I do have the lawsuit right in front of me, and the statements that Mr. Espiritu raised were not, in fact, made by any member of the Glendale Police Department.
Not alleged to have been made by any member of the Glendale Police Department. And I think that's the key. And again, I'm not trying to overstep my bounds, but this is critical. There are privileges that apply to individuals who file lawsuits. There's certain litigation privileges, sometimes absolute and sometimes qualified. There are qualified privileges appearing before this body in making statements. And I just want to point out to Mr. Espiritu, the statements that he is making appear to be defamatory. And Mr. Espiritu can take them any way he can take that away and do whatever he wants with them. But certainly those that are affected by those statements, which are clearly false based upon the allegations in the complaint, which don't even reflect what he stated, may have certain legal rights against Mr. Espiritu.
Yes.
Just wanted to make a quick comment.
We're still under oral communications, and
I understand. Never mind.
okay. Save it for comments,
Unoral communication.
if you so choose. Next item, please.
Item 4, eligible lists established.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item contains the eligible lists that have been established since our last meeting, which was in December. It contains a total of 7 eligibility lists, 5 of which are promotional. 1 is open, and another one is promotional and open. The report gives the name of the examination, the total number of applications received, and the total number of individuals who made the eligibility list for that particular exam. If you have any questions, concerns, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Also, the staff who administered these exams are very likely in the audience. So,
I have a question. Dealing with bulletin number 7319, IT application specialist / police crime analyst. Exactly what is that position? Could you just give me a brief description of that position?
CSI.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, that is a position of a information technology nature contained within our police department, mostly handling analysis of crime statistics and things of that nature. The reason there's one applicant and one individual made the list is that really the position had some very stringent minimum requirements to which very few people apparently qualified. So, but that's what that was, and that was handled, of course, on a promotional basis.
All right. Any comments? I have one card from Herbert Milano on this subject.
He's not here.
He left. So be it. Next item.
Item 5, class specification for approval, jail administrator.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, I think I had addressed at our last meeting that we will be going through a review of many of our job descriptions, trying to update them. Some are quite old, and we're going through department by department as the analysts have time to fit this into their schedule. So they're beginning to do this process. And as I said, over the next year, you'll probably see many job specifications brought before you for update. This is one in particular, happens to be one of our older class specifications in need of revision. It is that of the jail administrator. The revisions are minor, but they are very important. There are a lot of very important regulatory entities that govern the operation of jails, and the revisions of this particular specification address that, along with some required training for the person in this position to contain. So, with that, this item is for your approval. We do have staff from the police department here, Mr. Kwan, who worked on this specification, and our jail administrator, Juan Lopez, is here, as is Lieutenant Todd Stokes. So if you have questions, be happy to try and answer them.
I just have one very brief question. Dealing on page 3 of 3, under previously approved, it says job family, none. I'm just simply not familiar with that terminology. What does that mean?
I've never heard of that either.
I'm going to have one of my staff address that.
The other next one, too.
Yeah.
We are.
I've never seen that before.
Neither.
As you know, Roy, I've been around a long time.
We're modifying the formatting of our specifications, and I'll have Ms. Martin address
State
that.
your name, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Amy Martin, Senior Human Resources Analyst. As Mr. Doyle stated, we are revising our job specifications, and this is a new component that we've added. Job family essentially refers to, we have class specification series where you have different levels of a class of different positions. For example, administrative assistant, associate, analyst, senior analyst. In that case, we would indicate that the job family would be the administrative series. In this case, this is a standalone job specification and does not have other classifications directly leading to it or above it, and therefore it's listed as none.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Move for approval.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gantis,
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian,
Yes.
Commissioner Devine,
Yes.
and Chair Coleman.
Yes. I actually have a card on this item. Richard R. Espiritu.
May have to revote.
I'm glad this job specification is coming up for revision due to the fact the last time it was done, it was in 1992. That was right after the Americans with Disability Act. One of the recommendations I would like to suggest is knowledge of the Americans with Disability to be added to this, because there are people with disabilities, and Mr. Lopez and I had numerous conversations regarding ADA and ADA requirements. Matter of fact, one of the things that had to be taken care of, and Mr. Lopez did, was regarding the telephones. Once this is approved, I would strongly recommend that Mr. Juan Lopez be given a raise appropriate to his position. Thank you.
All right. Next item, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, excuse me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, because we didn't have the speaker prior to the vote, we need to take a revote on this.
Okay.
Essentially, I would request or recommend that you move to rescind your prior, or reconsider your prior action, vote on that, clean the slate, and then revote based upon the, now taking into account the comments made by the speaker.
I move to rescind the prior motion.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gantis,
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian,
Yes.
Commissioner Devine,
Yes.
Chair Coleman.
Yes.
I move to approve the item.
Second. I have a question, though.
Yes.
I think the suggestion is an interesting suggestion. In reading this, my sense is that element is probably taken up under this core course for California Standards and Training for Corrections. But I don't know that. Is that a fair assumption?
In all likelihood, but we can have Mr. Lopez address what is contained in the 80 hours of instruction by STC.
Mr. Chair, Commission members, the 80 hours of instruction that are provided by the core training does include a variety of liability issues, and there are disability items that are also addressed in terms of running jail operations. So, yeah, there are American Disability Act curriculum attached to the core course as well.
I think that would then, Mr. Chairman, in my estimation, that would cover it. And it also, Dr. Espiritu calls for, overall in all of our job specs, calls for the knowledge of applicable safety rules, practices, procedures, laws, codes, court decisions. And obviously that comes under this code. So I think it's covered, but I think your point's an outstanding point. Thank you. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
I think it's an outstanding point as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Espiritu. Next item.
And we need to vote.
We need to vote.
Roll.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devines?
Yes.
And Chair Coleman.
Yes. Next item.
Item 6, class specifications for approval, Assistant Director of Community Planning, Planning Administrator, and Planning Series.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is revision of class specifications, Assistant Director of Community Planning, Planning Administrator, and the entire planning series. There's been a great deal of discussion about the reorganization, or as we call it, the realignment of what was formerly known as the Community Development and Housing Department. The functions of that department have been realigned and essentially absorbed by three other departments, our Parks Department, our Development Services Department, and our Planning Department. And the functions that were absorbed by the Planning Department include building and safety as well as neighborhood services. Mr. Hagani, as the Director of now what's called Community Planning, has quickly embraced these changes and has put forth a reorganization that will address the needs of his existing operation as well as the new functions that have been put under his authority. We do have pretty much most of the specifications that relate to the planning function brought before you today. Really, there are three. The first is Assistant Director of Planning, which will now be called Assistant Director of Community Planning. And this specification essentially broadens the role. There's not a whole lot of changes in the actual content of this specification, but it does broaden the role a bit. The current assistant director within this department has primarily a planning background, but as you'll note in a few of the areas, particularly education, it's been broadened to also encompass other areas, including building and safety and neighborhood services. We want to expand that to ensure that the employees who are currently heading up neighborhood services as well as the building section would have the opportunity to perhaps promote into this job in the future. The second specification would be the planning administrator, which is we're proposing that it be now called just planning administrator. And the last time this classification was utilized, I think it was when Mr. Hagani was first hired here. The classification was somewhat limited, and the organization of the department was different. And the planning administrator was really limited to just the advanced planning and long-range planning oversight. That's essentially how the department was organized at that time. This specification seeks to broaden that classification to really enable it to do any type of professional planning functions throughout the department, whether that be historical, zoning, advanced planning, design, whatever the case may be. The third set of specifications has the entire planning series, which we were again choosing to revise it given the new reorganization. The titles within these specifications are largely remaining the same, except we are adding the urban design component within this series as a parallel to both the senior planner and the principal planner classification. And this along with the planning administrator later on in this meeting in closed session, will be dealing with proposals to transfer some individuals into the new titles. But for the most part, this is I think a first crack at the new organization, and really an attempt to have the classifications in place and truly reflective of what the vision Mr. Hagani has for this operation. So with that, and be happy to try and answer your questions. Mr. Hagani is here, along with his assistant, Tim Foy. Ms. Akopian from my staff, who helped with these specifications, is here as well. And you may have some cards in the audience as well. So,
Looks like Mr. Hagani is going to be spending the nights here from now on, huh?
Yes, Commissioner Devine.
Yes. In looking at the description, as Mr. Doyle pointed out, they did expand the duties under the knowledge, skills, and ability by including structural engineering and/or code enforcement, and also under the education and training, they expanded it to include engineering. There was one category, though, under experience that does not talk about expanding this position to include the possibility of the building department or the code enforcement department applying for that, or people in that department applying for the job. So I would like to suggest under experience, where it says 10 years of increasingly responsible professional experience in urban land planning, that they add after that and/or structural engineering and/or code enforcement, so that those are parallel with the education and the knowledge categories.
Which
it's Assistant Director of Community.
This is Assistant Director of Community Planning.
And where is this again? I'm sorry.
Okay, it's on page 2 of 2.
Yes, sir.
Under experience. It says 10 years of increasingly responsible professional experience in urban land planning.
He's right.
And my suggestion is to add and/or structural engineering and/or code enforcement, which would parallel what they did under the category called knowledge, skills, and abilities, and under the category of education and training. Also, under education and training, I would suggest that on the last line, they again add in the engineering category. You have the master's degree in city planning, architecture, public administration, and engineering's omitted there.
Okay.
And/or.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, those suggestions are appropriate, I think. With regard to the experience, that was probably an oversight. As I had said in my introduction, the intent of this position would be in the future to open this as a line of promotion for anyone either in the code enforcement area or the building and safety section. So I think
that means that engineers, we're going to maybe have an engineer as the Assistant Director of Community Planning?
Someday.
Do you have a problem with that, Mr. Gaddis?
No, I just asked the question.
Take it outside.
Do we have the wording, the additional wording?
I think we want to parrot. You want to parrot the wording, because I don't think you said it under knowledge of in the experience portion. In other words, you didn't say structural/civil engineering. I assume that was it.
Right. Whatever. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on this? Do we hear a motion?
Do you have any speakers on this item?
We have one speaker on this item. Excuse me, we have two speakers on this item. Barry Allen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, I'm Barry Allens with Vanguardians. The question arose regarding the Assistant Director of Community Planning, and the question is that does that upgrade now place the position over building and safety and code enforcement in addition to planning? I didn't see an org chart for the whole department with the package, but the language stated that the position will oversee the whole department, not just the planning section. That's my question for you.
Good question.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I think we'll have Mr. Hagani address, again, his vision for the department currently and in the future.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I think this is a very good question, and it's a fair question. The purpose of the Assistant Director of Community Planning replacing the Assistant Director of Planning is simply for the times that I'm not present, the City Manager and the City Council members and any member of any commission needs a point person to go to for any issue that's related to the entire department, and then one person can triage the questions and the issues, and the Assistant Director would be the appropriate person to do that. However, that does not necessarily mean that that person has oversight over, say, the building official's work, which requires very specific engineering degrees and sometimes certifications and licenses that the Assistant Director, for example, our current Assistant Director, does not have. So there's no pretense that this person will be supervising the work, the technical work that the building official would do, and there's not going to be any pretense that in the future it will be. And depending on the background of who is the Assistant Director, that person may be better versed in their own field, but for the point of communication, the City Manager or the Commission or the Council would know who to call to if I'm not there. That's the only difference. However, it's not an upgrade in terms of the salaries or the benefits in any way. It's just a line of communication issue. If you have any further questions, or if you have a better way to communicate that in the here, I would be open to that.
Mr. Hagani and indeed Mr. Doyle, I obviously have heard of this before and read this and had several questions and had several people that questioned me concerning this area. As I indicated earlier, Mr. Hagani, I'd served 16 years on commissions, of which 10 years is on this, 6 years as a member of the now deceased Board of Zoning Appeals. So I've had some obvious interaction with the planning department, and I thought Mr. Doyle's analysis of the way it was originally when you came on board, his description of it, I thought was charitable. I thought it was chaotic, frankly. So I think this is a lot more. We're getting a lot more organizational. I had some concern about moving the zoning administrator position out and then creating the planning administrator. Of course, I have that history of knowing the planning administrator was a different element than the zoning administrator. Is it a fair statement, Mr. Hagani? And thankfully, Mr. Doyle has presented, and Mr. Howard, I would like to have as part of our packages tonight both the new org sheet as well as I was also presented with the org chart that was prepared in December of 2008. And I noted that from the standpoint of, as you say, the communication level, that nothing has really changed in terms of Mr. Foy is basically in the same position. As you say, he is your second. If you're not there, he's another person to communicate to. Obviously, there have been expansions, as you say, of what Stuart Tom does, the building official, and what Sam Engel, I see here tonight, do. But obviously, their areas are a little more technical than the areas that might fall under Mr. Foy, who's much more into the planning area. Of course, that doesn't preclude that from being later on, as Mr. Devine pointed out, when we've expanded this to that. What have we done to in terms of the zoning administrator position, I guess, being morphed into or included into the planning administrator? It appears to me that, number one, the position of the zoning administrator in terms of the org chart is exactly the same as between the zoning administrator and the new position of the planning administrator. And my recollection of what the zoning administrator did, which under the old site was really zoning. I mean, that was kind of in that little box. Never understood it, thought it was chaotic, but there it was in zoning. And this appears to be, in my reading of it, yeah, the zoning is still there, but it's, I don't know, allowing for more planning issues to be morphed into that position. Could you comment on that?
Yes, I think your observation is right on. What you have seen taking place in the department is reflecting what has taken place in the planning field in particular over the last 40 years. You might remember the period that you might recall as chaotic. The planning department then was divided into zoning and advanced planning. And zoning itself had several different branches, and advanced planning had its own branches. That was already, when I was hired, an old-fashioned way of dealing with planning. That had been abandoned in the planning field for a long time. What planning has done, it has moved into this multidisciplinary every planner these days is a generalist, is multidisciplinary, knows something about pretty much everything related to planning, but individuals may actually vary in terms of their level of expertise in any specific area. And what that organization didn't allow us to do is that people necessarily could not move from advanced planning into zoning and vice versa that easily, and people would basically be stuck and pigeonholed for the rest of their careers. What we've done over the last few years, and this is the next step in that process, is that we have eliminated those artificial boundaries. Quite frankly, there are artificial boundaries. Before, we used to have to, even for the senior planners, we used to have to advertise senior planner in advanced planning or senior planner in zoning. Now we don't do that. A senior planner could come from any of those backgrounds and could apply for it, and thus we want them to also be able to advance in their future career to a higher position without having to be of a particular background. So that's really the way that it's reflected in the position. And over the last 5 years in particular, many of the functions that used to be under zoning have pretty much been disappearing. A lot of the design review process has been formally and heavily been dedicated and given to the design review boards and the design staff. Much of all of the use variances, for example, that used to be heard by the zoning administrator are now being heard by the planning commission. A lot of the high-profile projects in the redevelopment areas that used to be heard by the zoning administrator are now being heard by the agency or the city council. So the structure of the work program and the review process itself has been decentralized, and the powers have been shifted to many different places. So the institution of the zoning administrator is no longer functioning the way it used to. Instead, if we create a broader planning administrator position, you can still have an individual at that level, at that pay, with the set of skills that they have, and still be able to utilize their skills effectively in any aspect of the department work that's necessary, and also broaden their future, hopefully for new positions. I must tell you that when you have a specific zoning background, your chances of competing for a planning director position for a job compared to those who have a broader experience in that field are slim. You're better off to have a broader experience.
Question.
Yes.
Mr. Hagani, first of all, I wanted to make a comment. One of the things when you came on board that I and a lot of people appreciate, your doors have always been open in the planning department, and wanted to let you know that obviously we really appreciate the ability to walk in, and your doors and all your staff are extremely professional. So I wanted to make sure to thank you. And then to follow up on his question, when you mentioned about the zoning hearing variances processes, when you said it now is the function, you have shifted the function over to the planning commission. Is that?
I haven't. The city council has.
Okay. No. That was this process has already been taken. So all we're doing here is modifying the layout and the organizational chart to reflect what job movements that have taken place based on instruction from the city council. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And if I may add a sentence, the planning functions of the city of Glendale now, I must say, I'm very proud of the planning staff. The planning staff are now a head and shoulder ahead of some of our neighboring communities that were for the longest time touted as being ahead of us. They're now calling our staff to learn how Glendale is doing certain things. And that's reflected in the evolution of the organization that's functioning as such.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Let me, Mr. Chairman. You know, I want to follow up on that, Mr. Agani, because, again, as you know, I've been here a long time. I think it was, what,
We know that.
7 or 8 years ago, this department was gutted, as I recall. We lost a lot of our senior planners. We had a lot of new people. And I'm comparing the two charts, and for the most part, we have a lot of seniority that stayed on in the department, which I think supports what you're saying, that now we have people that are coming to us. And I know 8 years ago, or roughly in that area, that we were going to other people because we really lacked that seniority. So that's obviously a tribute to you and some of your foresight, and I parrot what Mr. Manukian said.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes.
Quick question. I was noticing under the essential functions for the planning administrator that many of them parallel or are identical to the ones for the assistant director of community planning. I'm wondering whether that was intentional, so you have overlap there, or what the thought was in having two positions that appear to be at the same level but with the same duties.
Yes, there is some deliberate overlap in there, and I appreciate the precise and observation that you've made. One of obviously the evolution of the community planning department with neighborhood services and planning and building and safety had a lot to do with what each one of those sections had at place at this point. And so we are taking three existing pieces and putting them together. One of the reasons that I'm proposing to broaden this description is that in the future, if there are vacancies in the top tiers of the department, then with a broader set of job descriptions, it'll be easier to rethink and see, based on, say, a year from now, when this department has functioned well together for a year, and we've learned from, each division has learned from the other divisions, we can then see if there is a vacancy or a couple of vacancies, and we all, like every other department, we have people who are close to retirement age, then what are the possibilities in terms of the direction that the department could go next? We did not want to close all of the doors and put an imprint that would not allow us to utilize our existing resources on staff the best possible way, and that we won't be necessarily in a situation to have to look outside every time that we're looking for to fill a position. That really is the purpose of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
Move to approve. Sorry.
I've got one more card. Ante Trinidad.
Serve with me.
Good evening, members of the Commission, Chair. I am here, first of all, let me touch on the response of Mr. Hagani to Mr. Gantos' points and questions raised. It really appears that the position of zoning administrator has been, or the power and the authority has been gutted. And I think not because it's irrelevant, the position is irrelevant, but I think there seems to have been some issue with the independence of the zoning administrator as an independent city official. In the meeting of December 8, under item number 8 on the agenda of the City Council, I lamented the effective elimination of the position of zoning administrator as a charter position. And after speaking, it was called to the public's attention by way of counsel of Mr. Howard to Mr. Starbird that the position is not a charter position. And I checked, wow, it wasn't there. What I can't trace, though, or some of the people that I've been discussing the issue with, is nobody can really tell in clear, unambiguous manner in how the position moved from being a charter position to being a non-charter position, because I know for a fact that at one point that position was a charter position. If I may give you a copy of a letter I addressed to Mr. Starbird, Mr. Howard, and Mr. Asakian, questioning how the process evolved. And that was written and delivered on January 22nd. And I'm sure that hopefully Mr. Howard would have had time to at least give an early light on whether, in fact, it was a charter position at one time or another. Because if it never was, then I must admit that my letter really is irrelevant. But if it was, then maybe it holds some water that before you take action that may result in ratifying the elimination, that may be possibly irregular and maybe even illegal. We don't want to go in that direction unless this has been clarified. If I may quote also in the Planning Commission meeting minutes of October 7th. Oh, by the way, that position, that the zoning administrator's position was not a charter position, was even affirmed by Mr. Hagani. And yet, in the minutes of the Planning Commission hearing of October 7th, and if I may read, page 5, appellant's rebuttal by Hassan Hagani, Director of Planning. Mr. Hassan Hagani stated that as planning director, he was responsible for the preparation of the cases for presentation to the board or commission hearing. However, the decision of zoning administrator as an independent officer of the city remains with the zoning administrator. I have reason to believe that this was not a misguided or flippant comment or characterization of the position, but rather a very specific, knowledgeable, and emphatic taking of position that he had no power to question the action of an independent officer of the city, implying that it was a charter position. So before you, at least in the manner that it may affect the position of Ms. Fuentes or the zoning administrator, please, I would request that you either table the whole application or carve out an exception. Thank you.
Ante, I have a quick question. I'm trying to understand some of these. You indicated you were certain that at one point of time it was a charter position?
Yes.
Is this based on your memory, or is this based on...
based on what I have read before that. And again, that could easily be clarified.
No, I will, to trust
yes,
you.
I know for a fact that I read a charter version stating that the zoning administrator's position was a charter position.
Okay. I just wonder if I understand correctly.
If I may be on any possibility, I may be wrong. It really could be clarified by the legal department. In which case, like I said, if I were mistaken, consider that letter withdrawn. If it were not, then it needs to be clarified on a council and commission level. Thank you.
Quick question. Not to you. Thank you. Chairman, this issue, first of all, I guess if it is a charter position or it's not, I think that's something that Mr. Howard has been notified or is working on. But irrelevant of that, my question is, the changes that are taking place in reality are not instigated by us. This is something that was decided by City Council, and our function here is to reflect the decisions that they have made and to have the organization chart reflect that. Is that correct? I mean, this is not our...
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Manukian, that is correct. Number one, the item before you has nothing to do with the zoning administrator classification. What you're looking at are class specifications for other positions within the community planning organization. But your purview over this is to ensure that the titles are correct and that the employment standards are appropriate for these positions. That we're not imposing any type of inappropriate level of experience or education that would be not in line with the duties of this position. So it is somewhat limited.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
However,
Mr. Howard?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, while I have not personally gone down into the basement of the city clerk's office and reviewed the records of every election and potential charter amendment that was on the ballot from the early 1900s to the present, I have gone back and looked at the charter, at least 1957 election, and this position was not then, nor is it now, nor was it between 1957 and the present, a charter position. In addition, the issue is somewhat of a red herring. Even if it was a charter position, say, in 1926, the fact is a charter is changed by a vote of the people. And if the position was removed from the charter by a vote of the people, it was done, regardless of one's feeling of why it was done or how it was done. That's the only way a charter change can occur. But in deference to Mr. Trinidad, and I appreciate the fact that he did send a letter, and I did receive a copy of it a couple of days ago. I'll go down and actually go through the files, but it really is not an issue for you to concern yourself with. If it was once a position, it was changed by the voters, because that's the only way it can occur. If it wasn't a position, it wasn't. And we'll confirm that by going back beyond 1957 into the past.
And what exactly would be the point of that?
that's my point.
Well, other than to educate myself and to
50 years
assist
back?
me, it's not going to assist this commission because, as I said, unless there's evidence to support the fact that someone illegally erased something in the paperwork that was not voted on by the people, it's not going to make a difference. That's why I use the phrase red herring, because it really is somewhat irrelevant. The voters are the ones that changed the charter. If it was a position, voters changed it. But again, I don't know. When we had the Charter Review Study Commission a number of years ago in preparing for the charter amendments that eventually went on the ballot in 2005, I reviewed the charter back to its inception. And I don't recall, and I don't want to sit here and say that I know for a fact, but I don't recall this position ever being on the ballot in any way, shape, or form before the people as I moved from the original charter to present day. I can't confirm that I have checked the charter back through the last election in 1957 when the charter was amended, and the position was not a charter position back in 1957 and from 57 to the present.
Okay. I have one more card on this agenda item. Leila Ramirez. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Commission, staff. I was on that Charter Review Committee, and it's my understanding, as we discussed this one section that, and I think it's as we refer to it in the charter, it says planning, city planning, and it's the byline says that it was eliminated by the 2005 election. And I wasn't sure that, in fact, what was removed.
You said I didn't.
City planning.
Okay.
It was removed, according to what's on the charter now. When I went back and checked on the city's charter, the first thing that pops out is this index. It's under city charter index, and then all these titles. And on one of the titles is administration, and then planning, and then under planning, all the information and anything you need, including the zoning administrator and the appointment of the zoning administrator by the director of planning, and all the pertinent stuff. So as I read the charter, these Glendale municipal codes are listed under, it's in the city. So I checked with the city clerk. Is what's on the online, is that correct? Is that accurate? And I was assured that it was. So there seems to be a discrepancy of what I'm reading online and then what we get printed as the charter. But at any rate, I had always thought that the zoning administrator is an independent officer of the city, and that's what it says on that planning description. And although what we have before you today is excellent, I mean, and it is in line with what's going on in other cities, however, that's not what's been going on in this city. And in order for it to be kind of smoothed out, then this particular change, I think, should be addressed. at that meeting, when these approvals were made by the city council, actually the ordinance was introduced, and nowhere kind of does it really say that we're eliminating the position, but it's in there somewhere. It was said, it was raised by Mr. Trinidad that it was a charter position, and the response was that in fact it was changed by ordinance. And I have tried to find the ordinance, and the city clerk has tried to find the ordinance, and I just kind of, I didn't give up, but I just have gone on to other things. But it's clear by that the minutes of that October meeting that it was an independent position, and it was an understanding of the planning director, and I think of the planning commission and others, the public that deal with land use, that it was an independent, and I thought a charter position, but maybe not. But at any rate, the way it's being kind of diffused is a concern of mine. I checked with the city. I contacted the zoning administrator, and it's her understanding that it was an independent position to also a charter. So that find the ordinance that removes her from whatever position she had and independence she has. And that's my take. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I can respond to most of those questions. Ms. Ramirez raises a question that someone else actually raised to us. Well, before I get that, Ms. Ramirez, the ordinance you're looking for is Ordinance 5682, adopted by the City Council in January become effective in January, adopted January this year. The question that she raised is what is by a couple of individuals now perceived to be somewhat of a that leaves an open question or a conflict on our website. When you click on the city clerk and you look under the municipal codes, it has the word charter, and then indented slightly and below it as part of the column, it has all the municipal code chapters. And so I can easily see how someone not familiar between the distinction of a charter and the municipal codes will just see the word charter above the municipal code sections and believe that's all part of the charter. The charter is a separate document, and the municipal code is also a separate series of chapters, most of which are here, that are adopted by ordinance, approved by their ordinances approved and adopted by the City Council. So there's a distinction, and we've actually looked at it and discussed in my office of ways we can actually have the website made a little clearer so that the charter stands out separately from the municipal code so that it can eliminate that confusion. So I appreciate that. That's something we've looked at, and that's not the first call we've had about that. Again, the only thing I can point out is that from the research we've done today, whether it's the charter in 05, let me get back to the other point. That's another point that Ms. Ramirez made, and that's what happened in 2005. The amendment in the charter at that time, the charter provided for a planning commission. It did not specifically outline the duties of a planning commission. It had that you should have a planning commission. That was deleted in 2005 in favor of language that provided that the council by ordinance may establish commissions, and they need to establish processes and procedures for appointments of commissioners and how commissioners carry out their duties and authorities. And that's now included in the charter. So we just eliminated some language that really didn't do anything except establish a commission, which is somewhat required by state law now. You have to have a planning commission or some planning operation that functions like a planning commission. So I guess my point is the one zoning administrator, at least back as far as 1957 that I can confirm, has never been a charter-created position. Number two, it wasn't mysteriously pulled out of the charter by any skullduggery. If it was by a vote of the people. Again, assuming that it may have been in the charter in 1957. I can't confirm that or deny it, but I'll certainly look at the charter pre-1957, but again, it goes back to the point of really doesn't affect this commission's decision tonight.
All right. Do I hear a motion?
I move for approval of the planning series.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Assistant Director.
Oh, yes, with the amendments concerning the planning administrator, assistant director of planning, community planning. Pardon me.
Still second. Still second?
With the amendment.
For you.
Commissioner Gantis?
Yes.
Commissioner Manukian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair Coleman?
Yes. Next item, please.
Item number 7, report on advertising budget expenditures, October 2009 through December 2009.
Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this item is your quarterly advertising budget report. This report is to address the advertising activity expenses from October 1st, 2009 to December 31st, 2009. In this period of time, a total of $9,525 was spent. The second page of this report gives you the breakdown of where those monies were spent. You'll see a rather large expenditure of $4,000 on the recruitment video that we're producing with the police department targeting the Korean community. Aside from that, most of the other advertising is done in either websites or print publications, and you see them broken down into the various categories, and the position that has actually been advertised is listed there. In addition to these expenditures, there were, again, other things that staff was involved in, involving both outreach and advertising, including the Unity Fest event that occurred on October 11th. Staff was there. We had a booth set up. We also participated in the Glendale Unified School District College and Career Fair on October 28th, and we had a member of our staff interviewed on a television program, ARTN, discussing job opportunities at the City of Glendale. Again, just a small taste of some of the things that have occurred over the past 3 months with our staff, and that's operating under somewhat of a hiring freeze. So. With that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Ms. Akopian from my staff prepared this report, and she is here as well.
Any questions? All right. Next item.
Item 8, amendments to the civil service rules.
Would it be appropriate for me to discuss why this item is being pulled from the agenda now, or should I do that in the comment section?
Under the chairman.
All right.
You don't even know now why it's taken off calendar.
All right. I have made the decision to pull that item from tonight's meeting because we do not have a full commission. It's a very important item. There's been a lot of work put into it. It's extremely extensive. Commissioner Abkarian is passionate about a number of rules, if I can say so.
That's why we love him.
Yes.
And
Things,
I think it would just be inappropriate to carry on and go ahead with the amendments of the civil service rules without him. And that's why we are pulling it from tonight's meeting. He is available for our very next meeting. And if Commissioner Gantis, are you going to be available?
I will.
Commissioner Manukian?
Absolutely, and I think it's an excellent idea to have Albert with us, or everyone.
And Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would suggest that we move that to the February 10th meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments on
And,
that?
Mr. Chairman,
Sir.
just that if there is anything on February 10th, then it get kicked over to other meetings. I don't know if we're going through an agenda forecast later.
Yes,
we do.
Yeah, we got a agenda forecast coming up right now.
Okay.
We don't need a motion for that, right? Okay.
No. Next item, please.
Item 9, agenda forecast.
Well, that's nothing.
Mr. Chair, the agenda forecast is before you, and per your direction this evening, we will again revisit the introduction of the Civil Service Rules amendments on February the 10th, and go ahead and move the mid-year report on hourly employment to the next meeting.
Very good.
We'll try to keep that meeting of the 10th somewhat limited.
All right.
Probably best given tonight anyway.
Next item, please.
Item 10, reports, information, employee past due performance evaluations.
Commissioner Devine.
Mr. Gantis volunteers.
Pardon me?
My voice with me.
That's okay. Mr. Gantis volunteered.
Thank you, Mr. Devine and Mr. Manukian. Well, we have, thankfully, no past dues from the city attorney's office and the city manager's office, and none from the city treasurer's office, none from community planning. Congratulations, Mr. Hagani. None from finance, none from fire, none from the Glendale Water and Power, none from human resources, Matt, none from the police. We have a total, I think we have something like 1,600 employees. We have like 17 first notices and 11 second notices. And, of course, this all goes over the holidays, so I suppose we can give a little slack, but hopefully we'll clean that up in the next go-round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you. Next item.
Item 11, Civil Service Commission staff comments.
Commissioner Manukian.
I just want to make a quick comment. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, one of our dear police officers, by name of John Harrison, passed away after a brave battle with cancer. John was a very good friend of mine, and he was a very good friend of this community and was just a tremendous asset. Anybody who knew him knows how what a wonderful human being he was. And he will be greatly missed, and I hope we can adjourn this meeting today in his honor.
Yes, we will.
Good suggestion.
Thank you.
Any other?
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Mr. Doyle.
Two items, very brief. I've notified the commissioners about the upcoming AB 1234 training, which is mandatory ethics training for elected officials and boards and commissions who are subject to the Brown Act. Has to be done every 2 years, and I remind you all that this will be held February the 11th at 4 o'clock in the Municipal Services Building, presented by none other than our city attorney. He does a very, very good job. And if I'm not certain which of you need to go, because if you've gone in the last year, you don't have to go again.
You said every 2 years?
Every 2 years.
Okay, if
yes.
we did it when we were at the BZA, do we still have to do it again?
No, it's only required every 2 years. Doesn't matter if you've changed commissions or not. You don't have to retake it if you've changed commissions.
Okay,
If
but
you have,
just in case if we have to, when is it?
If you're close to your 2-year anniversary, it's February 11th, and room 105, Municipal Services Building, 4 to 6, 2-hour minimum course. For those of you who can't make it, and I'll follow in, there is a memorandum circulated. We can certainly get it to you. There is a free online course sponsored by it's on the Fair Political Practices Commission website in conjunction with the Institute for Local Government, and that is a self-certification course that you can take. You finish it, you print out your certificate, and the certificate needs to be turned into the city clerk with a copy to our office, and that's retained as a public record for, I believe, it's 5 years.
We have a date, sir. Just
February
to
11th.
be on the safe side, I think I'm coming.
February 11th.
Love to see you.
And I will not be there.
That's why I'm coming.
Okay.
We also try to schedule, I won't even call it a makeup course, but a supplemental course or a secondary course sometimes in the next 6 months to capture those folks who, because of one reason or another, business or otherwise, couldn't make it. But again, that online course is available as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one other thing. I've been informed that at some point in the next few months, the city council chambers will be undergoing renovation.
Oh.
So at some point, it could be a month from now or 2 months from now, we will likely have to move a couple of our meetings to a different location, and in all likelihood, we'll probably end up in the Municipal Services Building. Same time, same date, just a different location. So I will keep you informed of that when that
I
occurs.
can't imagine why they'd want to upgrade this. I look at that. Is that blue or turquoise carpet that I think has been there for probably longer than I've been alive?
That's pretty long.
Thanks. One for you now.
If you are interested in seeing what the renovation will likely look like in the foyer of City Hall, there's a very good rendering. It's very impressive, and it's being done at what I'm told a very reasonable cost.
About time.
What?
It is.
Oh, really? It needs to be done. This place is embarrassing.
Well, that does it for the open session of tonight's meeting. We are now going to go into closed session.
Okay.